I came home to find a crew dismantling my young daughter's swing set while she sobbed on the sidewalk. All because Margaret decided it was the wrong shade of blue.
Learn the rules or move out.
She had no idea she'd just handed me the rope I'd use to hang her career.
See, I didn't get mad. I got curious. I spent 3 nights in the county archives digging through 20 years of property records.
By the time the city inspector arrived, Margaret's smug smile was gone. She wasn't worried about my kids' toys anymore. This isn't just a story about a petty neighbor. This is a masterclass in how to use a Karen's own obsession with the rules to bankrupt her.
It started with a single pink tricycle. Most people think of homeowners associations as a group of bored retirees worried about the height of your hedges. And in the beginning, that's exactly what I thought about the Pinecrest Estates HOA. I was wrong. It wasn't an association. It was a cult of personality, and its high priestess was a woman named Margaret. Margaret lived 3 houses down in a pristine, white brick colonial that looked less like a home and more like a museum. She didn't have kids. She didn't have pets. She had a clipboard and a ruler. I first met her 2 weeks after we moved in. My daughter, Lily, who was 4 at the time, had left her tricycle on the edge of our driveway for exactly 20 minutes while we went inside to get a glass of water. When we came back out, there was a bright orange sticker slapped onto the seat of the trike. It wasn't just a note. It was a formal notice of violation. The adhesive was that industrial-grade stuff that leaves a sticky residue no matter how much Guggen you use. It felt like a brand. I laughed it off at first. I told my husband, Mark, "Hey, we've got a live one next door." We thought it was a neighborhood quirk. We didn't realize it was a warning shot. The next week, it was the unauthorized wreath on our front door. The week after that, it was a fine because our trash cans were visible from the street at 6:01 p.m. on pickup day. The rules stated they had to be out of sight by 6 p.m. Not 6:05, not 6:01, but the real war, the one that would eventually cost Margaret $40,000 and her reputation, started with the playset. Lily has sensory processing issues. For her, a swing isn't just a toy. It's a tool. It's how she regulates her nervous system. When we bought the house, the first thing we did was save up for a high-end cedarwood playset. We didn't buy the cheap plastic stuff from a big box store. We spent $4,500 on a professional-grade structure with a slide, 2 swings, and a little clubhouse. We made sure the wood was stained a neutral cedar bark brown. We read the HOA bylaws front to back. The bylaws said outdoor play equipment must be constructed of natural materials and located in the rear of the property. We followed the rules, or so we thought. On a Tuesday morning in July, I was in the kitchen making lunch when I heard a heavy engine idling in front of my house. I looked out the window and saw a flatbed truck. 2 men in work vests were walking into my backyard. I ran out the back door, heart hammering against my ribs. "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice shaking. One of the men looked at a piece of paper, then back at me. "We're here for the unauthorized structure removal. HOA order." I felt the blood drain from my face. "What are you talking about? That's my property. You're trespassing." "Ma'am, we have a signed removal order from the board president. It says the structure is non-compliant and the owner has failed to remove it after 3 warnings. I never got 3 warnings. I shouted, and that's when I saw her. Margaret was standing on the sidewalk, arms crossed, wearing a beige sun hat, like she was attending a garden party instead of a colonial-style execution. She didn't even look at me. She looked at the men and pointed. "The anchoring bolts are at the base," she said, her voice cold and clinical. "Make sure you don't damage the sod. The homeowner is responsible for the cost of the grass repair." I ran over to her, my phone already in my hand, to call the police. "Margaret, what is this?" I followed the bylaws. "It's cedar. It's in the back." She finally turned to look at me. Her eyes were like chips of gray ice. Section 4, Paragraph B of the 2024 Architectural Supplemental Guide, dear. Play structures cannot exceed 8 feet in height at the peak. Yours is 8 feet, 3 inches. I measured it from the sidewalk with a laser level last night. 3 inches? I whispered. "You're taking my daughter's swing set for 3 inches? Rules are what keep this neighborhood from becoming a trailer park," she said. She actually smiled. It was a tiny, thin-lipped movement that didn't reach her eyes. You were notified. You ignored the letters. Now, the association is taking action to preserve the aesthetic integrity of the street. I check my mail every single day. I knew for a fact I hadn't received 3 warnings. I had received 0, but as I watched the men start to unbolt the clubhouse, I realized what had happened. Margaret was the one who handled the HOA's outgoing mail. She had simply never sent them. She had created a paper trail that only existed in her files, making it look like I was a defiant, rule-breaking rebel. Lily came to the window then. She saw the men taking down her fort. She started to scream, a high, thin sound of pure heartbreak. I looked at Margaret. I expected to see a flicker of guilt, a moment of maybe I went too far. Instead, she just adjusted her hat and checked her watch. "They'll be done in an hour," she said. "The invoice for the removal will be added to your monthly dues. It's $1,200. Have a nice day." She walked away, her heels clicking perfectly on the pavement. I stood there in the heat, watching my daughter cry, watching $4,500 of our hard-earned money being loaded onto a truck, and feeling a level of rage I didn't know I was capable of. My husband wanted to sue immediately. He wanted to go to the next board meeting and scream. He wanted to throw the tricycle through her front window. No, I told him, watching Margaret's house from our darkened living room that night. If we fight her on her turf, she wins. She knows the HOA laws better than any lawyer we could hire. She spent 10 years turning that board into her personal army. "So what do we do?" Mark asked. "Just let her take $6,000 from us between the set and the removal fee?" "No," I said. I looked at the notice of violation on the table. "She wants to play by the rules? Fine. We're going to find the rules she thinks don't apply to her." I went to the basement and pulled out the thick binder of HOA documents they gave us when we closed on the house. I didn't just read them. I memorized them. I looked for every contradiction, every vague sentence, every loophole. But I didn't find the nuclear option in the HOA binder. I found it in the one place Margaret never thought to look, the city's 1994 drainage and sewage master plan. You see, Margaret's house was the biggest in the neighborhood. She had added a massive mother-in-law suite over her garage and a beautiful, stone-paved sunroom in the back. It was gorgeous. It was the gold standard of Pinecrest Estates. But as I looked at the city's plot maps, I noticed something strange. A dotted line ran straight through the back of her property, a line labeled Critical Flow Easement. I felt a cold shiver of excitement. In my city, you can build a lot of things. You can build fences, you can build sheds, you can build HOA-approved sunrooms. But there is one thing you can never build on. You can never build on a municipal drainage easement. Not for any reason. Not even if you're the president of the HOA. I looked at the dates on her construction permits. Then I looked at the dates she took over as HOA president. The pieces began to click together. Margaret hadn't just been enforcing the rules. She had been using her power to hide the fact that she had broken the biggest rule of all. And she had no idea I was about to turn her museum into a demolition site. The next 3 weeks were the quietest of my life. To Margaret, I looked like a defeated woman. I paid the $1,200 removal fee without a word of protest. I kept my lawn mowed to exactly 2.5 inches. I even waved at her when she drove by in her pristine white SUV. She probably thought she'd finally broken me. She probably thought I was just another neighbor who had learned to fear the clipboard. But while my house was quiet, my laptop was screaming. I stopped being a mom and a graphic designer at 9 p.m. every night and turned into a forensic auditor. I realized that if I wanted to take Margaret down, I couldn't just find a mistake. I had to find a crime. HOA drama is petty, but municipal code? That's where the real teeth are. I spent my lunch breaks at the county records office. I told the clerks I was researching property history for a school project. They didn't care. They handed over microfilm and dusty ledgers that hadn't been touched since the 90s. I cross-referenced the Pinecrest Estate's original plat map with the city's 1994 drainage and sewage master plan. The discovery was even bigger than I had hoped. The dotted line I'd seen, the critical flow easement, wasn't just some minor pipe. It was a primary runoff artery designed to prevent the entire lower basin of our suburb from flooding during a 100-year storm. In 2018, Margaret had applied for a permit to build her sunroom sanctuary. The city had initially denied it, citing the easement. I found a rejected application in the back of a folder. But then, 6 months later, a second application appeared. This one had a modified site plan. It showed the sunroom shifted 5 feet to the left, supposedly clearing the easement. This one was approved. I went home and looked at Margaret's house through a pair of high-power binoculars from my bedroom window. Then I looked at the approved site plan. The math didn't add up. Margaret hadn't shifted the sunroom. She had simply lied on the drawing. She had submitted a fake site plan to the city, and then, as HOA president, she had self-certified the construction. Since the HOA board has the final say on architectural harmony in our neighborhood, the city inspector, who was overworked and likely a friend of someone on the board, had just glanced at the HOA's signed approval and signed off on the final inspection without actually pulling a tape measure. She had built a permanent 400-square-foot stone and glass structure directly on top of a no-build zone. But I needed proof. I needed someone with a license to say what I already knew. I called a private land surveyor. I told him I was planning an addition and needed my property lines verified, but I also suspected some encroachment from the neighbor's side. I paid $1,500 out of my own pocket for a staked survey with encroachment analysis. The surveyor, a grizzled guy named Pete, spent 4 hours in the heat. When he was done, he walked up to my porch, wiping sweat from his forehead. He looked back at Margaret's house and shook his head. "I don't know who she paid off to build that," Pete said, pointing at Margaret's sunroom. "But that entire back corner of her house, it's sitting 3 feet deep into the city's primary drainage easement. If we get a heavy rain and that line backs up, her sunroom acts like a dam. It'll flood the 3 houses below her. Is that a violation?" I asked, my heart racing. "Violation?" Pete laughed. "It's a liability nightmare. If the city finds out, they don't just fine you. They have the right to enter the property and remove the obstruction at the owner's expense. No questions asked. You can't build on city infrastructure, period." I thanked Pete, took the certified stamped survey maps, and put them in a fireproof safe. Now, I had the bullet, but I wasn't ready to pull the trigger yet. I wanted Margaret to feel the same paper trail pressure she had put on me. I wanted her to see the walls closing in, just like I did when those men were taking down Lily's swing. I started small. I sent an anonymous tip to the city's water and power department. I didn't mention Margaret's name. I just said I was a concerned resident who noticed significant standing water near the primary drainage easement during the last rain and was worried about unauthorized structures impeding the flow. Then I waited. A week later, I saw a white city van parked in front of Margaret's house. 2 men in neon vests were walking around her backyard with the same blueprints I'd spent weeks studying. Margaret came flying out of her house, her beige hat practically vibrating with rage. I watched from behind my curtains. I couldn't hear what she was saying, but her gestures were frantic. She was pointing at her HOA President badge. She was pointing at her house. The city workers didn't care. They kept pointing at the ground. They kept pulling their tape measures. That night, I saw the lights in Margaret's sanctuary stay on until 3 a.m. For the first time in years, the queen of the HOA looked tired. But the real nuclear move was still to come. You see, an HOA has a very specific clause in its insurance policy. It's called Directors and Officers Liability. It protects board members from being sued personally for their decisions, unless those decisions involve willful misconduct or fraud. By self-certifying her own illegal building and lying on a city permit, Margaret hadn't just broken a rule. She had committed fraud. I wasn't just going to get her sunroom torn down. I was going to make sure the HOA, the very organization she used as a weapon, would be forced to turn its back on her. I drafted a formal demand for investigation to the HOA's legal counsel. I attached the certified survey. I attached the rejected 2018 permit. And I sent it via certified mail, signature required. The clock was ticking. Margaret's $40,000 nightmare was about to begin. The atmosphere in Pinecrest Estates changed overnight. It was as if the neighborhood could sense a predator had become the prey. Usually, Margaret's driveway was a hub of activity. Contractors she had hired to improve the common areas or subservient board members coming over for strategy sessions, which were really just gossip circles about whose grass was a half-inch too long. Now, the driveway was empty. The city had officially moved from investigating to enforcing. 2 days after the city van left, a thick, manila envelope was taped to Margaret's front door. It wasn't a sticky orange note like the one she'd put on my daughter's tricycle. It was a formal order of remediation from the city building department. Because I had friends in a local community group, I managed to get the gist of what it said. Margaret had 30 days to vacate and remove any and all unpermitted structures encroaching on the municipal easement, or the city would contract the demolition themselves and lien her property for the cost, plus a 200% administrative penalty. But Margaret wasn't going down without a fight. She was a woman who had spent a decade bullying people into submission. She didn't know how to retreat. That Thursday, an emergency HOA board meeting was called. Usually, these meetings are sparsely attended, maybe 5 or 6 people complaining about the pool hours. But word had gotten out. I made sure of it. I'd spent the afternoon walking my dog and casually mentioning to neighbors that the HOA might be facing a massive legal liability because of certain board members' building projects. When I walked into the community center, the room was packed. Margaret was sitting at the head of the table, her face a mask of heavy foundation and barely contained rage. She looked older. Her hair, usually a perfect silver bob, was slightly frayed. "This meeting is called to order," she snapped. "We have one item on the agenda, a frivolous and malicious attack on the board's integrity by a disgruntled resident." She looked directly at me. I didn't flinch. I sat in the front row, my hands folded, a copy of the city's demolition order sitting on my lap. "The board has reviewed the complaints regarding my property," Margaret continued, her voice gaining strength. "We have determined that the structures in question were built in full compliance with the 2018 standards. The city's current inquiry is a result of a clerical error that our legal team will handle. Therefore, I am moving to use the HOA's legal defense fund to retain a private firm to sue the city for harassment." A murmur went through the room. The legal defense fund was made up of our dues. She was asking the neighborhood to pay for her personal lawyer to fight her personal crime. "Point of order," I said, standing up. My voice was calm, which I knew would infuriate her more than screaming ever could. "You aren't on the board, Sarah," Margaret hissed. "You don't have the floor. Actually, according to Section 9 of the bylaws, the ones you love so much, any member of the association can challenge the use of the defense fund if there is a conflict of interest. And Margaret, you aren't just a member of this conflict. You are the conflict." I walked to the front and handed out copies of the document I'd received from the county records office, the original 2018 rejected permit. "This board member lied to us," I told the room. "She told the city she moved her sunroom, but she kept it right where it was. She signed her own approval. If the HOA pays for her lawyer, the HOA is admitting to being an accomplice to fraud. And if that happens, our insurance policy, the D&O policy, will be voided. Every single board member sitting at this table will be personally liable for the lawsuits that follow." The other 4 board members, men and women who had spent years nodding like bobbleheads to whatever Margaret wanted, suddenly looked like they'd been told the building was on fire. They looked at each other, then at the rejected permit in their hands. "Is this true?" the vice president asked, his voice trembling. "Margaret, did you know about the easement?" "It's a technicality," Margaret shouted, slamming her hand on the table. "I improved the property values of this entire block. That sunroom is the jewel of Pine Crest." "It's a dam, Margaret," I said, "and the city says it has to go. The question is, are we going to let you take our neighborhood's savings down with you?" The vote was 4-1. Margaret was stripped of her signing authority that night. They didn't just refuse to pay for her lawyer. They suspended her from the board pending an internal audit of the last 5 years of her projects. As the meeting broke up, Margaret pushed her way through the crowd to get to me. She was so close I could smell her perfume, something floral and expensive that now smelled like desperation. "You think you're so smart," she whispered, her voice shaking. "You think you've won. but I have more money than you'll ever see. I'll tie this up in court for 10 years. By the time I'm done, your kids will be in college, and I'll still have my sunroom." "Maybe," I said, "but the City Water Authority doesn't care about your court dates. They care about the rain." I walked out into the cool night air, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. I knew what she didn't. I had already sent a copy of the board meeting minutes, the part where the board admitted the structure was unpermitted, to her homeowner's insurance company. I knew that in the world of high-stakes property, the only thing more ruthless than an HOA Karen is an insurance company that finds a reason not to pay a claim. Margaret had spent years using the rules as a cage for everyone else. She was about to find out how small that cage felt when you were the one trapped inside. The end didn't come with a bang. It came with the sound of a diesel engine at 7 a.m. on a Tuesday. Margaret had tried every trick in the book. She'd hired a high-priced fixer lawyer who sent threatening letters to the city. She tried to file for an emergency variance. She'd even tried to claim that the sunroom was a medical necessity for her supposed seasonal depression. But as I told her at the meeting, the City Water Authority doesn't care about your feelings. They care about the fact that if a massive storm hit, her illegal sunroom would turn the street into a lake. Because she had refused to tear it down herself within the 30-day window, the city invoked their summary abatement power. I stood on my porch with a cup of coffee, watching as a heavy-duty excavator and a crew of 6 men pulled up to Margaret's white Colonial. They weren't there to be careful. They weren't contractors. They were a demolition crew. Margaret was out on her lawn in her silk pajamas, screaming at the foreman. She was waving her phone, claiming her lawyer was on his way with an injunction. The foreman, a guy who looked like he'd spent 20 years ignoring people like Margaret, didn't even look up from his clipboard. He just pointed at the city seal on the side of his truck and gave the signal. The first crunch of the hydraulic claw hitting that $100,000 sunroom was the most satisfying sound I've ever heard. It wasn't just glass and stone breaking. It was the sound of Margaret's ego being dismantled. It took them 6 hours. They tore the entire structure off the back of her house. Because it was integrated into her main roof line, the removal left a massive, gaping hole in the rear of her home, covered only by blue industrial tarps. They didn't haul the debris away for free, either. They piled it in her driveway, a mountain of jagged stone and broken glass, and told her she had 48 hours to clear it or face more fines. But the 40,000 number, that's where the real math of revenge comes in. A week later, I saw the assessment of costs filed at the county courthouse. I had been tracking the case like a hawk. City demolition fee, $18,000. The city charges triple what a private contractor would, just for the administrative overhead. Mandatory site restoration, $7,000 to fix the drainage bed and replant city-approved vegetation. Civil penalties for fraudulent permitting, $10,000. Administrative fines, 30 days of non-compliance, $5,000. Total, $40,000. And here was the kicker. Because I had sent the board minutes and the survey to her insurance provider, they officially denied her claim for accidental loss. They cited the intentional acts exclusion. Margaret had to pay every single cent out of her own pocket. To cover the bill and the repairs to the gaping hole in her house, she had to take out a high-interest second mortgage. The neighborhood was transformed. Without Margaret at the helm, the rest of the HOA board turned into cowards. They were so terrified of being sued for misconduct that they passed a new resolution. All previous architectural supplemental guides, the fake rules Margaret had used to steal our kids' toys, were null and void. I didn't wait for them to give me permission. That following Saturday, Mark and I went back to the store. We bought a new play set. This one was even bigger. And just for a little extra flavor, we chose the one with the bright yellow slide. As we were bolting the swings into place, I saw Margaret. She was standing by her mountain of debris in the driveway, wearing work gloves, picking up shards of glass by hand because she couldn't afford the cleanup crew. She looked at our yard. She saw the yellow slide. I didn't say a word. I just waved. She didn't wave back. She dropped the glass she was holding, turned around, and walked back in her broken, tarp-covered house. 2 weeks later, a for sale sign went up in her yard. But in a neighborhood that now knew she was a fraud, And with a house that had a structural red tag from the city, she couldn't give the place away. She ended up selling it for $150,000 under market value to a young couple with 3 very loud, very active dogs. As for me, every time I hear my daughter laughing on that swing, I think about the $40,000 it cost for Margaret to learn one simple lesson. If you're going to spend your life enforcing the rules, you better make sure you aren't the one breaking them.